you illuminate to me something that I've had in my thoughts, is that at the top of our whole system, it's like the Nordstrom principle. You have students at the top, and what's right next to the students but great teachers like yourself. And everything you talked about to me, it brings that back home, and it shows we're down here. I mean, as state board, we're down here in our policy making. We need to remember that everything it should be supporting our students and the people that are right next to our students, which are our teachers, our amazing teachers, and our amazing schools and the administration around that. So thank you again for reiterating that.
Thank you.
Kevin.
Sort of ditto that, Nathan. I mean, the great work that you're doing there. Your plea, I think, starts out in a very important place for all of us, to have our best teachers working with our kids who need them the most. I'm curious, over time, what your thinking has been, or how that's evolved on whether or not seniority should be a driver, how that plays against money, all of those types of things, because I clearly think money can be a great incentive to get good people where they need to be. But the other piece is, if I'm managing the enterprise, I also want that ability to take my best people, not rely on seniority as being the driver to put them in there. So I'm just curious.
My number one, so my policy lens is really simple. Whenever I'm considering a policy, I ask, how is that policy going to impact our neediest students? And if the policy will help our neediest students, I support it. My principal, Pat Irwin, often talks about an experiment that was done in Pittsburgh in the 80s. It was like 83. And essentially a new superintendent came in, and he went to every every high school and said, who are your 5 best teachers? Took 3 of them from each school, and then put them at the highest need school, and then changed it. Absolutely changed it. And that low performing school was beating the district average in every indices. If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes.
Judy.
Thank you so much. I certainly appreciate your, as has been said, your passion and your intellect around all of this as well. It's just great to hear from you. I had a question regarding, you mentioned, new teachers.
Yep.
How do you, have you and your colleagues discussed anything about how could college preparation be different in order for those that are coming out of college into the classroom be better prepared, be better engaged? So have you had any conversations wrapped around that at all?
For sure. One of the most important things, and honestly the easiest thing to do, is to be more intentional about teacher placements. Usually when you place a student teacher, an email goes out and says, who wants a student teacher? And then you just sit in with that person. We should only put student teachers with our people with distinguished evaluations. And if that means we need to put 2 student teachers with 1 teacher and they co-teach together and kind of alternate, then so be it. The way that student teaching is done right now is very haphazard. It's just basically, hey, Bob, do you want one? Sure, Bob takes one, and that's all there is to it. Another thing that I would say is I went to the Evergreen State College, and at Evergreen they do 2 student teaching placements. So we have basically a fall placement where we go and fail, and we're set up to fail, and we should fail there, right? Like I shouldn't be good at that point. And then we spend a quarter back on campus reflecting, and then go back out in the spring. I think the use of more intentional placements and multiple placements would be really beneficial. I'll add in addition, PLU down in my end of the Sound has a year-long placement program where student teachers basically start in September and go all the way through June. I don't think 6 weeks is enough, or 8 weeks is enough, or even 12 weeks is enough. And so if we're more intentional with who we place student teachers with, and if we give student teachers longer placements, I'm guaranteeing that we're gonna have better outcomes. Sure.
Any other comments? Okay. Just one thing to say, please stay in education.
Well, I love the work that I do, right? But nobody wants to be taken for granted. And you can never compensate an effective educator for the value they create, but we don't even try, right? We don't, the state salary allocation is $34,000. And particularly in our rural districts where we have high need students in poverty, I don't want to slander random cities in Eastern Washington, but who wants to go live in insert name of place and work for $34,000 a year? if they have an advanced degree in mathematics? Like, who does? Not me. The only reason that I can remain in teaching right now is that my wife and I essentially have made a contract with each other that we're not going to have children, and that we live in the working class community that we serve. And if we didn't do that, I couldn't afford to stay in the classroom. I'm willing to make that choice, but not everybody is. And people shouldn't have to make that choice.
Mona?
This is my second time hearing Nathan, and each time it's gotten more powerful. Where are you speaking next?
In room 306 at Milken High School.
But I want to thank you for the message, and I want to end with a question to all of us in this room. We've known for a long time, the research is clear, the data is clear. The most important dime we can spend in this country on educating all of our students is putting, as Nathan has said, a quality teacher in every classroom. What's wrong? What's wrong in the United States? What's wrong in Washington State that we cannot do that? We can talk about competency-based and everything else, but until we address the issue of quality, it's a waste of time.
I would just add, nobody asked me to add, but I'll add. I would rather, teacher quality to me matters more than anything. And so I would rather have a effective, passionate, and impactful educator who build relationships, working with low or poor standards, than the most rigorous standards ever and somebody who's not effective in the classroom. Like, teacher quality matters, and we have to invest in it.
Ben?
Thanks for coming. It's good to see you. I don't know if you remember we had dinner together at the teacher. First of all, I just want to, we're thanking you, but particularly I have been captivated by your blogs. And in particular, as somebody who does some writing myself, and in particular, the letter that you received from that gentleman in New York absolutely floored me. We were in the middle of a meeting and I was reading it on my phone. I just could not believe it. Have you had additional dialogue with that gentleman? Have you received letters of a similar kind? Well, I think he's going to tell us a little bit about it, but I just want to emphasize that part of what you're doing is making a real contribution, and it's meant a lot to me, and so, just wanted to say that from my standpoint. I have a couple of things I want to ask you about, but can you
Sure.
tell them what?
So I wrote a blog post that went viral in January called "The Conversation I'm Tired of Not Having," and in that blog post I talked about housing segregation and school segregation, and how essentially through local funding, communities have walled themselves off from the inequality. And so, just kind of as context, a week ago I met with the House Democrats, and I talked about the reason why there's nobody protesting right now about McCleary is that the people who normally protest have insulated themselves from inequality through local levies. And so the people who would normally be like angry and uproar don't care because they're taking care of their own kids. In the blog post, I talked particularly about how we've allowed high poverty schools and urban schools to degrade in a way that we wouldn't allow schools in the suburbs that serve more white populations. And I got a fascinating letter response to it from a man named Ralph Fusco. Ralph Fusco sent it on his letterhead, which was fascinating to me as well. He's a lawyer in Utica, New York, and a quick Google search told me that he ran for school board in 2014, which is devastating for me to think. And essentially it was a racist screed about African Americans and the issues awfulizing African Americans, awfulizing children, and awfulizing children in poverty. But the thing that really got me about the letter is if you take the letter and turn that letter into a set of policy recommendations, the policy recommendations that he's talking about are no different than our current reality. Like, I live in the city of Tacoma. City of Tacoma is 70% white. I work at Milken High School. It's 70% brown. Like, we live in segregated schools, in segregated enclaves, and those who have take care of those who they care about, and those that don't have get left behind. And like that is the reality of schooling in Washington State and the reality of schooling around America. And like, I'm watching right now in the rooms, people squirming in their chairs. That's uncomfortable, but that's also the truth. You said some other questions too.
Yeah. So anyway, just, if you haven't seen that letter, and if you haven't read the original blog, take the 20-minute, I'm telling you, it'll just floor you. Anyway, I also respected the fact that you're bringing some meat to the table here in terms of specific things that you want to talk about, and some of them are really resonating with me. One of them is the blizzard of placement tests out there, and you were describing a young woman's situation there where it's with the ACT and the SAT and the ASVAB and whatever else, and I think you concluded by saying there's got to be a better way, and indeed, there has to be a better way. The interesting thing is that very few of those are actually mandated by the state, so it's an odd construct in a sense. We require the SBAC, but how do you think about, first of all, you say there should be a better way, and I agree. What do you suppose that might be, if you're willing to expound a little bit? And who do you think ultimately steers this ship? I mean, these are tests from outside of the system that are leveraging the K-12 system versus tests that the K-12 system creates. Leveraging. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'll take the SBAC writing exam, right? So the reading and writing exam for the SBAC. If a student's enrolled in AP Literature and earns a 2 on the AP Lit exam, or is enrolled in AP, and so 2 isn't college level, but it's approaching, right? If they earn a 2 on the AP Lang exam, then why should they have to take the SBAC? Or if we have the SBAC as a state test in Washington State, I know some of the community colleges are moving away from, or some of the four-year schools are moving away from the SAT as a requirement, but why can't SBAC scores count as the compass placement exam scores for community colleges? And I know that's happening in some places, but it's not systemic, it's basically handshake agreements. And so in doing so, we can limit some of the redundancy. That's 2 pieces of low-hanging fruit for me. The other thing that I would say is that I'm not sure that, so the purpose of the exams is to provide data on how the system is performing, right? We want, and the civil rights community wants data on how we're doing closing the achievement gap. That's the stated purpose of the exams, is system-wide data. What we try to do sometimes with exams is use exams to evaluate instruction and use exams to rank students. And I'm not sure that's really necessary. I'm looking at the testing schedule right now for my kids, and so the kids are being offered the SBAC ELA 10 because the cutoff score for 10th graders is lower than the 11th graders, right? This is gaming. This is well, that. Sure, that may be incorrect, but that's my staff is being told right now. So just the number of exams we have and the purpose of the exams, somebody needs to be able to or be willing to take somebody else's word for it at some point.
Holly?
I'm curious, when you look at your testing calendar, how many of those tests are for retakes? Makeup or retakes?
1, 2, 3. But there's also, so there's that, and it's all the tests, right? And testing season basically starts in 2 weeks. So it's the ELPA for language learners, and then you're right, history, reading, and writing retakes, and then SBAC 11 English language arts, math, and then there's the big row for AP testing, but really that's 14 different tests in our building. Then there's SBAC 10, EOC algebra, EOC geometry, EOC bio, and the other thing is different districts have decided what they are and aren't going to do, and I think Tacoma is one of the ones that decided to keep doing both. Some decide, and that's not your fault obviously, some decided that they would just stop doing the history and only do the SBAC. It's complicated, it's hard, but the bottom line is it's also unfair, particularly to 11th graders. And if I'm an 11th grader who's taking the AP exam in Lang or Lit, and you're telling me that I have to take the SBAC, I understand why we're requiring them to do it, but for that student, that's a hard sell.
MJ?
I think you highlight, if we were really doing what was best for students, would we do this? You just showed, at least me, and I'm sure everybody else here, that what are we doing? What are we doing with our understanding and our instituting some of these things? This is their reality. Maybe we didn't state this policy, right? All these tests. But this is what a student feels like they need to take. This is what a school feels like they need to take. If students are top priority, What are we doing?
And again, there's a loud anti-testing voice in the profession, and that's not who I am.
Right.
But the redundancy harms students, period. And honestly, the redundancy empowers that anti-testing voice. And so we're giving ammunition to those people when we do the things we do.
So Madeline and Baxter, sorry. Do you have anything that you want to share or ask?
Sure. I'm obviously not a student that necessarily needs a good teacher to be able to do well by myself. But I tell you what, when I have a good teacher, it makes all the difference in the world. School is not fun to go to when you don't have good teachers. And that's me saying that. So imagine my experience 10 times worse or more. I don't know how a lot of kids can get through it with teachers that can support them. And the teachers that I've had that are really good, make school worth going to. The relationships that I've built with those teachers are invaluable. I can go to them all the time to help me out with certain things, and I just think this presentation has been very valuable.
And I just want to say, like, I was sitting over here during the earlier parts of the meeting. You all as students, as a government teacher, like I love that you do this. Like, I'm sure you're not getting paid for this, and I'm sure that this is not the most. They are. Oh, even better. Just like I love that you choose to do this, and it's really awesome. Because like when I was in high school, you couldn't have paid me. Like, no. So I think it's really awesome. And in fact, if you ever want to take AP Government, come to Lincoln. I got you.
I'm in AP government right now.
All right.
It's awesome.
Baxter, do you want to say anything?
Madeline and I have been sitting over here listening to you, and the entire time I've been looking at her and I've been going, I've been saying this. I've been thinking this. And in fact, I have a Spanish teacher who is arguably one of the best teachers I've ever had. And because of him, I want to pursue to become fluent in Spanish, and he's inspired me in ways that I can't ever thank him for. And we're very close, and we were talking about politics. He loves to ask me about that stuff, like, who are you going to vote for? And I'm voting this election, which is weird, that's nice. But then we got onto the education topic, and like, what are my views on that? And my words exactly were, is that you can give a great teacher a horrible curriculum, and they will have a great class. You can give a horrible teacher a great curriculum, and the class is going to fail.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of my main beliefs looking at our education system. And so I just wanted to thank you for bringing, not necessarily like light to that subject, but just really embodying that in everything you do, because it's huge.
Thank you.
I also have one more question. So you mentioned ways that college or training teachers in college could be changed, but then you also said something about how you shouldn't just let a teacher loose their first year. Do you have any ideas around that?
Well, so one of the problems is that almost every solution I propose takes more funding. And not going to throw legislative shade right now, but okay. If funding wasn't the issue that it is, I think that first-year teachers shouldn't be on their own 5 periods a day. And first-year teachers should be team teaching with master teachers like myself. And one of the things that I see happen building after building, even my own building, which is a great building, is that your first-year teacher always ends up with like the roughest load. So first-year teachers in every high school in Washington State are teaching basically all Algebra 1 to the 8th graders who failed algebra last year. And first-year teachers have all freshman English, which is our highest fail class like in the state, across the board. And so first-year teachers should have coaching, they should do some sort of co-teaching, and they should have a limited number of preps. Now, that doesn't always work. Like if you get into a rural school environment where you have 300 students, there's one person who's the science teacher, right? And they're doing chem, biology, earth science, physics, they're doing all that. Like whenever possible, we should build structures where they get support. I think about medicine, right? Like you don't finish medical school and then be like, let's go, right? Like you do a residency, like you are doing rounds with people, you are constantly being supervised. It's not just like, hey, I have an undergrad in education from Central and now here are my 140 kids. Like that's crazy we do that. And it's crazy we've done it this long, but we do.
One last comment, Randy.
to our state to get teachers